All right, we are back. Thanks for staying with us. You're listening to Planet Green Trees, episode 484. We're calling Exonerated, Better Late Than Never. We were just in the middle of our conversation with attorney David Rudoi, who, as we were celebrating his jury trial victory in a resisting obstructing case. We actually have video footage of the event that brought about the charges. We were going to plan to play that in a second. But in the meantime, we are delighted to have as our next guest, on time and on schedule as always, the very, very favorite of many in our community, Senator Jeff Irwin. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Michael.
Everybody was in a big panic a couple weeks ago because nobody could really figure out what was actually happening up at the legislature regarding the expungement bills. That was obviously a social justice issue that many in our community feel needs to take place, along with the legalization. But the last time you were on the show, you had laid out for us, and I'd ask you to do it again, how we got to this point before the discussion about, before the existing bill got there. There were several bills that had been covering different topics. Can you give our listeners a little background on that, if you would, please?
Yeah, broad overview of what's been happening in the last couple of years with this whole discussion about improving Michigan's laws around expungements or set-asides. This all started really in the wake of Proposal 1 and the start of last year. A lot of legislation got introduced. You may remember I introduced Senate Bill 416, which was really focused on providing a broad set of exoneration for people who have cannabis crimes on their record. But the action really started in the State House. And the action started over there because not only was there energy brewing from the community that was saying, look, we legalized cannabis, now we need to right the wrongs of this war on cannabis and provide an opportunity for people to have their records cleared. Not only was there that energy, but there was a lot of other energy broadly around criminal justice reform and this idea that people deserve a second chance and people deserve an opportunity to get back on track and stay on track, and that a criminal record can really be a big barrier in terms of housing and employment and educational supports, and that this really wasn't good for our society and wasn't good for the public and wasn't in the people's interest. And so a whole bunch of legislation got introduced to try to change the situation, which, as many of you folks know, especially the attorneys on here know, currently is that in the state of Michigan, it's very, very difficult to get your record cleared. Michigan is one of the most harsh states around criminal justice in general, and around criminal records, we currently have a policy that is very, very restrictive, and you can only even ask for an expungement if you have up to 1 felony or up to 2 misdemeanors. And that's very, very restrictive, particularly in a state and in an environment where people might get multiple crimes all as a part of one event. And also, when we have so many laws, so many of them for things that are relatively petty. And so, that was the kind of logic, that was the kind of backdrop for what got things rolling early last year. And this freight train that is now on the way to the governor's desk has been moving along steadily ever since then. The bills started in the House, House Bill 4980 through House Bill 4985, plus House Bill 5120. And those bills were heard in the House last year. They came over to the Senate right around the end of the year. We then heard them in the Senate Judiciary Committee. That was certainly slowed down by the pandemic and the response to it. But we heard those bills over the summer and then reported them out, sent them back over to the House with our relatively minor changes, and then those were all approved and sent to the governor's desk just days ago. And so I anticipate that we'll have a signing ceremony and that these laws will become, or these proposals will become law soon. What they do, broadly speaking, is improve the opportunities for people to seek expungement. So there are a few main parts, and then I'll stop. Well, the one part that's really important is something that we're calling one bad night. It's really wrapped up in House Bill 4985 from Rep. Gay Danyogo. That bill says that if you commit multiple offenses all in the commission of one general crime, that's going to be counted as one for the purposes of those limits that we were talking about earlier. Another thing that the legislation does in general is that it provides a broad relief for a whole set of really low-level crimes. And so what it says is that for driving with license suspended, driving without insurance, and for cannabis use and possession, those crimes are going to be essentially, automatically wiped away. And, the court really is going to have to establish some sort of reason to not wipe those crimes away. There's also another piece of legislation that intersects with that, and that's the House Bill 4980. And what House Bill 4980 says is that any crime that isn't an assaultive crime or that doesn't carry a life sentence will be automatically taken off your record after 7 years for a misdemeanor and 10 years for a felony if you don't reoffend. And so that is going to interlock with the bill that is specific to cannabis, House Bill 4982. And together what they do is, with respect to records for folks with a criminal conviction related to cannabis, it says that, one, if you have a conviction for use or possession, the court shall grant that expungement request or that set-aside request. That affects about 235,000 people who have a record for simple possession or for use. For the folks and the records that I've looked at suggest there's about 30,000 people who have a record for possession with intent to deliver or for manufacture. We were unsuccessful in getting those sort of shifted into the bill to provide relief more quickly, but those criminal codes are covered by the Clean Slate Bill, by House Bill 4980. So if you have a possession with intent to deliver or a marijuana manufacture crime that is, older, it's eventually going to come off through the Clean Slate. And because, of course, it's been a couple years already since we legalized, that clock has already been ticking. So, really just to zero in for a second on the cannabis issues, one of the things I was trying to do was, with the introduction of Senate Bill 416, provide relief that was really more broad, that says, look, it's now legal, and if you were doing anything before that is now legal activity, we're going to automatically wipe it away. What we ended up getting was a bill that basically said if you have a cannabis crime that is older than 7 years for a misdemeanor or older than 10 years for a felony, we're going to automatically wipe those away. But if you have a cannabis crime that is newer than that, you're going to have to apply, and that shall be granted if the crime that you committed was, something that's now legal. And there's a presumption with use and with simple possession that that's the case. So that's basically where we landed with those.